Keys to success: asking the right questions. Inexperienced people may struggle with how to approach potential mentors and sponsors. In this SPE Live, Maria Angela Capello and Eve Sprunt explore appropriate questions to ask mentors and potential sponsors with two leaders in energy with vast experience in different cultural settings, Ulrike von Lonski and Luis Pacheco. Maria, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much. We are delighted to have SPE organizing this event, because a live cast provides an opportunity for spontaneous conversation. And I want to start asking a question to Ulrike von Lonski. She is COO of a multinational organization, which is pivotal for the energy sector. So, Ulrike, what questions do you expect to be asked by mentees?
Thank you very much, Maria. It actually varies a lot depending on who I speak to, what the background is, under which circumstances we get together. But one of the things that I think is very important for mentees is to do their homework. So before you reach out to a mentor, before you prepare a session with a mentor, be clear about what you want to achieve. Line up your questions. Look at some of the objectives that you have for that call, and do the homework, because to get the best out of any situation, I do think that you need to put in what you expect to get out. Now, mentors are normally senior people in the industry, and they're here to support you. They're there to answer your questions, but you need to be prepared to actually ask the right question. So what would that be? It would be the things that take you further. It's the issues where you have queries around. How would you see this? You know, what can you explain to me about that? If I need to do this, how would you suggest I go about it? Keep it very open, and look at the topics that your mentor is strong on, because you might have different types of mentors. You might have somebody who's very, very good at certain aspects of your job, you know, technical aspects or knowledge base, whereas others have much stronger experiences with business issues, with finance issues, with communication issues. All of that is very valuable, and you should be prepared to ask the right questions on those.
Thanks. So I pass it over to Eve.
Okay. Well, I will. My first question is for Luis. People in power tend to recommend and select people who resemble themselves. How do you ensure, as a sponsor, that you are prioritizing talent over empathy with someone who resembles you?
That is perhaps one of the most difficult things to do, and it depends really on the environment. When you have companies who are national companies, that means that they don't have international exposure, there is a cultural incest. It's a lot easier to happen when you have a multinational company. Then you have the issue of empathy. People tend to be attracted to people who think like themselves, and you really need to work willingly. I mean, it's not something that comes natural. It's when you have two children. When you have two children like I have, usually one of them you have more empathy than the other one for whatever reason. But you need to remember that the two of them are your children, and that you need to encourage each and different personality, and not be influenced by the fact that one or the other has more empathy to your tastes, or to your likes, or to your dislikes. So this is really one of the most difficult things to do. And in the end, it also has to do with the fact that the company has as a core value diversity. A lot of companies talk about having diversity as a value, but they don't really encourage it. So that's something that leadership from the top, from the very top, has to really communicate down the change of command.
Well, talking about the very top, that brings me an idea, which is many times we assume leaders have the time to mentor, to sponsor others, but I don't know if that is so true. For example, I want to ask Ulrike, you are in a C-suite role as a COO. How do you find time to serve as a mentor, and how do you choose who to mentor?
That's a very interesting question. So as much as I would like to mentor a lot more than I actually do, in the end, it is a time issue. It's a resource issue. So we do have to restrict ourselves on that. But if I'm dedicated to it, then I will make the time. So for those that I commit to, I will honor that commitment, and I will do it. It's usually every month, every 6 weeks, a conversation. So that's actually easy to put into the diary and arrange. I have some informal mentoring, which is easier because it's one-offs or it's specific opportunities. In those cases, it's the more the merrier. I mean, one of the things that I think are very helpful are group mentoring sessions, because I feel that it's not just the individual that learns from somebody senior, but everybody learns from each other as well. So I try to sort of come up with different scenarios in order to maximize the opportunities. But in terms of choosing somebody, it really is about people who approach me. It's not that I go out and say, you're the one I want to mentor. It's more about young people that have approached and said, I would really appreciate that. Can we do something? So that's one of the recommendations that I would make is go out there and find yourself somebody. It's not always a formal process. The informal ones can be just as fulfilling and useful as a more formal one that the company has set up.
Well, if I may add to that, that Ulrike just said, and I will talk about mentoring rather than sponsoring. Sponsoring looks more like pushing somebody along the chain. I think about the informal part. I think is you have to use a very old saying. You have to walk the talk. Sometimes you see people that go into this mentoring business with a very structured methodology, and then when they get out of that setting, they are a completely different person, and without realizing that the mentoring happens in the day-to-day way they behave rather than in this Catholic confession type of scenario.
Well, Luis, I appreciate your comments there. And I think before I ask you your next question, what I was going to comment on is both that and Ulrike's response. In that what I found mentoring is in good relationships, in effect, you get as much information as you're giving. And so to me, for someone in the C-suite, it's very important to maintain that contact with the bulk of the organization and understand what their issues are, what their perceptions are, and what they're doing. Because one of the hazards of leadership is getting disconnected. So I think that in all of these conversations, the ones that work are when people are getting information and knowledge is flowing both ways. And to me, that's one of the richnesses of mentoring, is the connectedness with what the current issues are. With that, I'd like to turn to the next question for Luis. He mentioned that he preferred mentoring to talking about mentoring to sponsoring, but both of them are very vital questions. And of course, one of the things is that mentoring's a conversation, so it's much easier for all of us. There's not the heavy issues behind it. When you're sponsoring, you're really putting your reputation at stake on the person. So Luis, how do you determine if the person you are sponsoring has the ambition, commitment, and passion to succeed, so that you won't end up being embarrassed by having sponsored them?
Well, yeah, yes. Well, I think it's naive to think that the sponsoring by one person makes a difference. I think in the end, at least in the settings that I have experienced throughout my professional career and academic career, the sponsoring tends to, you need to have more than one if that is to succeed, because you are a sponsor, but you have enemies within the organization. So whoever you sponsor probably will have your enemies. So you need to be very careful with this very, concentrated sponsoring. That's on the one side. On your particular question, I would say that passion and commitment are like coughing. They're very difficult to hide. You see it in the results. And it's something that is very difficult to simulate as well, because in the end, the results, the way you handle yourself. As I talked during the interviews to the book, I'm all enough not to have had formal mentoring or sponsoring during my career, because it was just not in fashion as it is today. So in the end, what happens is that not because you stay late or just because you do a bit more than the rest, but because your results are a bit better than the rest, and you start distinguishing yourself and calling the attention of people who will sponsor you. I don't know what exactly the word means yet, but people who will nudge you along the way because they will look for you to help them. And in the process of helping them, they help you. So as Ulrike said about the information exchange, it's also about, in the sponsoring and mentoring, there's also an exchange that has to work for both sides.
I think I totally agree with what Luis said there. And in particular, I see even less formality around the sponsoring arrangements than I see around the mentoring. Sponsoring is something that either somebody picks you, and they pick you because of your enthusiasm, because you've shown yourself as somebody worthy of attention. And then they sort of act like a little bit like a godmother or a godfather to you. The other way of doing it is approaching somebody. And if you approach somebody, then it's really to sort of keep them in the loop in what you're doing, and asking them for their guidance and their support. One of the things that we've done is we've done a major global study 3 years ago, which we're now repeating, the untapped reserves. And in that, one of the critical issues for women really was the support of a sponsor. They feel that they're not as much involved in networks as many others are. So having a sponsor, somebody who speaks up, who has access to those networks, to those levels of influence, is essential. So we had 70% of women saying that was a critical issue for them, whereas on the men that participated in our survey, it was about 50%. So I think we need to look at more and encouraging women more to find somebody. And it's not always waiting for somebody to find you and to notice you. It's about approaching somebody who you are inspired by and tell them that and say, you know, I'm interested how you got to that place. How can I get to that place? It's a different level towards mentoring. It's more about, as I said, finding somebody who can look out for you at higher levels. And it doesn't just have to be within your own company. Areas of influence go well beyond that.
Yeah,
Ulrike,
if I may, and I'm sorry to interrupt because this issue of more women in the workplace and being the father of two young professional women, I'd like to ask a question to Ulrike. How do you protect, if that's the word, or avoid that the sponsoring becomes a vehicle for sexual harassment or improper behavior or all that sort of thing that one hears happens in the workplace and one has witnessed in the workplace?
Very important question, and something that you have to be very careful with. So from both sides, I mean, as a sponsor, if you see somebody who is inspiring themselves and enthusiastic, and somebody where you think this person can go far, I could help that person, you do have to think about that a little bit. And I think you just have to be very professional about that relationship. As a young woman approaching somebody and asking for their help, I think that is just as much with mentoring as with sponsoring, as with any professional relationship, is, you know, be aware of safety issues and go about it in a professional way. On the other hand, I wouldn't let it stop you from reaching out and approaching somebody that you're inspired by. Let others know about it, but and you know, and keep sort of safety features in place. But at the same time, I do think that these are great opportunities, and you should make yourself available to those.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to this in several ways, because building on some of these comments, I think the aspect of going in and asking for something specific may not be nearly as good as asking for advice. I know now's the time when many people's jobs are uncertain. And one piece of advice that I read and used to my benefit in the late 90s when I was looking for another position was, don't ask someone for a job, because not everyone can give you a job, or even if they could, they may not realize they can. You ask them for advice. And those conversations about advice then lead to, oh, well, maybe there's this job here or that there. And I think on any of the mentoring or sponsoring discussions, asking for advice is a very critical part of it. But how you ask, addressing Luis's comments about the sensitivities with women, is many women like to think that they can dress however they would like. And I remember one conversation with a professor, and he was discussing, and it turned out it was exactly about his Latin American students, that he was very perturbed when they came to speak to him, that there was so much flesh showing, and that it was extremely distracting for him. And so while women would like to think that they can wear whatever they want, whenever they want, the first piece, in my view, and this is controversial, of your protection is how you dress and how you act. And so if you are conservative, you will tend to get conservative response back. And that was certainly my experience during my career.
I would definitely agree that, you need to have a professional approach to this, and you need to have a business environment and atmosphere. So I think if you stick with that, then you should be able to get a very valuable conversation. And particularly on the sponsorship side, I don't see a sponsor being actively involved in individual day-to-day conversations with their sponsee. I'm not even sure what you call it.
Sponsoring.
but you really want to have their voice somewhere where it makes a difference. So I think that's certainly an area where you can stay safer. But otherwise, keep the door open and make sure people know where you are.
Absolutely, Ulrike. Thank you. So really just reflecting on what you've all said. So, theme here was asking the right questions. And I really like what Eve was saying earlier about asking for advice is maybe a really good door opener, because to me, there's always a question of what is the right question. And you've been talking about, corporations walking the talk, leadership setting the agenda. I think Luis mentioned this is the fashion, so we have to have something, at the corporate level in terms of mentoring and sponsoring, versus the informal, empathetic, connected piece around asking for advice or sponsorship or mentoring. I think it was Eve that said, setting an example through daily work. So my question to everybody is, what is that balance between the formal setting and the informal setting? Is there a balance? How do we encourage that culture within a corporation to support mentoring and sponsoring at formal and informal levels? Perhaps Ulrike, we'll start with you and then Luis.
I think a lot of companies have started to implement formal mentoring arrangements between senior executives and younger potentials, but that is something that a company does. I think that there is always a lot that an individual can do. On the sponsoring, I don't really see that many formal arrangements. Sponsoring is still very much an informal one. You might sort of say on your board, you might encourage the members to go out and sponsor somebody, but everybody else, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't see those as very formal arrangements. There is no reporting structure. There is no sort of set amount of meetings. It's an initiative, and it's something that we need more to take that initiative, particularly from the top.
Luis, do you want to comment on that, please?
Yeah, I'm afraid I wasn't able to get the question because of network problems. Maybe you could give me a shorter version of the question.
The shorter version of the question. So the balance between the formal and informal processes, if you want, within a corporation on mentoring, for example. What do you see that? Is there a balance? Is there a conflict?
Well, yeah. Well, again, this is a matter of personality and style. I'm more of an informal type of person. I used to have, formal work meetings with people, and then all of a sudden, because a problem that arises or a particular theme that we wanted to discuss, I would say, okay, let's go into sponsoring or mentor mode right now, like trying to extract lessons from what we were doing and then go back to work. That's one way of doing it, of what I did anyway. The other is that to me, formality is stifling, especially in human relations. I think informality, to me, I tend to do that. And again, as I said, if you have in a lot of interaction with the people you're responsible for, then you'll have that relationship day to day in an informal basis having more weight than saying, like, let's sit down and do sponsorship or mentoring. I think that's the way I look at it. Informality is my way of looking at this, especially because my mind always tries to find humor in things. So for me, it's very difficult to be formal. And my sponsors have found this very unsettling. But anyway, here I am.
Very interesting. So the balance between formality and informality, largely cultural, if I'm hearing it correctly. So the workplace culture versus society culture, which brings me on to a question for all of you again. We're in a different workplace culture currently due to COVID, so everybody's working remotely or largely working remotely. How is that impacting the question of sponsoring, or more on mentoring and sponsoring?
Who wants to go first?
Maria, yeah, please go first, yes.
Okay. I think that this remote working opens up opportunities for us. And now I am based in Houston, but having lived in the Middle East for 14 years, I am very used to connect remotely. And actually, I have built my network online, I would say. I would like to highlight that this also has opened up the opportunity and the understanding that it is important to have a network not only within your company, but across, beyond the borders of companies and countries and even regions. So I think that the remote working will open up opportunities for mentoring, and that we need to be very conscious on the cultural differences so that we access these contacts with the consciousness that there are differences in the cultural take.
Thank you,
I'd
Maria.
like to build on that in that SPE is all about networking and building networks all around the world. And so one of the interesting things, we talk about the great tools we have now, but I've been networking with people around the world since the 80s, when you had echoing phone calls and huge problems like that. And it turns out some of my most critical sponsors have been people on the other side of the world from me. So I think one of the things for people to understand at this time is that not having necessarily physical presence, but remote presence shouldn't be a handicap at all.
I totally agree. And I think it's, again, what Mariangela was saying, it's an opportunity. Maybe now more than ever, you need to take your own initiative because you need to make it happen. It is available, it is possible, but you need to make that first step because you don't have natural places of networking or meeting. So you either have to go to somewhere where it's online, or you have to make that call or send the message and ask for that meeting specifically. But because of the digital opportunities that we have now, it doesn't matter where the other party sits, whether they're in Houston or in the Middle East or anywhere, because you're now just as close and as quickly together as you would be if you were in the same city and in the same office.
Well, I'm old school. I'm all for digital and all that. In fact, one of my last positions was executive VP for IT in an oil company. So I'm all for. And in fact, one of the anecdotes I can tell you from there is that I tried to push in that particular oil company remote work, and the CEO wouldn't go for it. He says that people wouldn't work, will be difficult to supervise, and here we are. But even though I believe in that a lot, I think pressing the flesh is important. Pressing the flesh also means that you need to understand different cultures, which you cannot do digitally. I remember when working in the UK, studying in the UK, that my vision of the UK was from the Guardian newspaper, whatever reason, because when I got there, a friend of mine said, read this newspaper. Of course, in time I learned that the Guardian had different political leanings than the Times. So if you don't understand that, you don't understand the culture, you don't understand the conversations, it's difficult then to go into that other part, which is the what we're talking about, the sponsoring, trying to understand the other guy's culture, the company's culture, and the diversity you're trying to impose. So digital helps quite a lot, as this event clearly shows. But I also think that pressing the flesh is still important. Otherwise, you'll be back to not comprehending each other.
I'd like to give a counterexample to that, Luis, in that I consider Maria Angela to be one of my best friends, and we've collaborated on many very important projects. And we've only physically been in the same place together a very few times. Mm-hmm. So we have been networking across the world through very different time differences. Because despite what Ulrike says, if you have one person in the Middle East and the other person in California, the hours of comfortable overlap are limited. But I think that the tools and being able to see and hear someone directly are strong enough that you can very quickly learn the other person, learn their work style, and collaborate and have a feeling for who you want to mentor and sponsor and help remotely.
Well, do you like classical music?
Do I like classical music?
Yes, do you like classical music?
Yes, and I've heard Maria Angela's concerts. Although many of them were too early in the morning for me to get up and listen to.
That's pressing the flesh in an emotional way. I'm not trying to. I mean, I know there are a lot of counter examples. I'm just trying to, to be contrarian to what you're saying.
And I agree with you, Luis. I mean, that would be the perfect scenario. The perfect scenario would be face-to-face with people that you know well, that you built a relationship with, that you already have a relationship with. But I don't think that we should let that stop us from using the new technologies and, sort of expanding our own environment and our own vision. Because it doesn't just have to be the person next to you. It can be somebody on the other side of the world. And these are the kind of facilities that make it possible.
I want to highlight something that perhaps we have not given enough attention to, and that is the role of the social media and our presence and voice in the social media. I am so glad to tell you and to share with you that I am constantly, as probably it happens to you, contacted by young professionals from all over the world, by Twitter, by LinkedIn, and several of them have contacted me now that I am in Houston because they want to get to meet me in person. So there are, benefits, pros and cons from both worlds, but certainly the digital world enables you to reach out further, louder, perhaps, and but still people need that connection, the personal connection. So yes, there is a balance there.
Fascinating hearing you all talk about this and that dilemma between in-person and sort of having to work remotely and digitally now. And I think, Luis, to your point, in-person, nothing can replace that, right? That personal contact, that connection that you get being with somebody in their presence. But to Ulrike's point, this is an opportunity now, right? And Maria Angela was saying the same thing about social media, is that it's a new opportunity for people to break down that barrier and make a connection and see a face behind the voice, which makes it so much easier to communicate with people. People always struggle, I think, with asking the right questions. So seeing a face and a smile and seeing how people react will help guide people in knowing what is the question I need to ask. So I think that's essential. So yes, we can't replace personal meetings, but we have to take the opportunities that are given to us now to allow us to ask the right questions, reach out, ask for the advice that we need for getting us forward in terms of mentoring and finding sponsors for us in the workplace.
Let me may I ask you a question before you everybody has the real face and the put up face. Are we in this media our real selves, or are we actors more than we are in real life?
That is probably the most interesting question so far. I would say that in this mentoring and sponsoring, when you see, we collected even a compilation of stories from different leaders and young professionals, and we realized that some of them did not want to speak the whole story. And it is a rosy story when you don't see the dark side of mentoring and sponsoring. Because exactly of that, you want to tell, and it's easy for us to tell, stories which are successful, positive, smiley, but the progress comes when you understand the dark side. If you want to say more about it.
Yes, thank you for that segue, because indeed, you know, when you're asking for success stories, people want their name attached. They want the bragging, they want the publicity. But when you want to find out about what went wrong, you have to grant people absolute security that there's no way they can be identified. So you may have to mask a number of aspects of the attributes of the person to ensure that they're completely confidential.
Ulrike, I'll let you have final word here.
Yes, I think it's about building that connection, and that connection is about being genuine. So if you really want to get the best out of a mentoring or a sponsorship relation, then you should show your real face, because only then can you open up enough to make it really worthwhile.
Absolutely, that's a really powerful message to Luis' question of who are we really behind the mask, right? But to your point, be genuine, and then that is the way that you will connect with people, regardless of the media that you're connecting through. So
absolutely.
Thank you very much. Fascinating conversation about asking the right questions. Luis, Ulrike, Mariangela, Eve, thank you very much for joining us here on SPE Live. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
It's been a
you.
pleasure. Thank you.